Pittsburgh Steelers fans, it is time for another edition of Know Your Enemy. It is week 2 in the NFL, and man, it sure feels good to say that once again. Of course, I am Michael Beck, deputy editor of BehindTheSteelCurtain.com, joined as always by my co-host, Mr. Geoffrey Benedict. Geoffrey, how are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm hanging in there. Doing all
Beautiful. Right. We also have a very special guest from the Mile High Report, Joe Rowles. Joe, how are you doing, sir?
I am also hanging in there.
It couldn't get any better sounding to me, I think. Guys, we got football back, and it sure feels good. Joe, I'll pose this to you first. What did you like the most out of your Denver Broncos in Week 1?
I thought Draymond Jones was really exciting. I thought Jarrell Casey was as advertised. Melvin Gordon was better than I hoped so far, so that was good. Jeudy's release looked really nice. If he can kind of get the catches, kind of rookie stuff. And again, before I go on a tangent, Jerry Rice dropped passes his rookie year. So, and I'm not saying Jerry Jeudy's Jerry Rice, but so I'm not too concerned with that. But I was really excited to see his route running, what I could see of it. Noah Fant, the first half of the game with Noah Fant was really awesome. So, a lot of stuff I liked. Garrett Bowles did not poop himself. I was really excited about that. I was worried. I've been sweating Garrett Bowles all year, so I was really excited to see that he didn't look terrible. So that was good.
You're under Mike Munchak. That does wonders.
Yeah.
We in Pittsburgh know all about that. I'm sure we'll dive into that a little bit. But Geoffrey, I want to ask you the same question about the Steelers first. What'd you like out of them in Week 1?
I liked how Ben Roethlisberger recovered. He had a rough start, and he kind of changed his game. He fit it in. He was more of a game manager. He was taking what was there. He was playing smart, committed no turnovers, ended up with 3 touchdowns. I thought he warmed up well. Juju Smith-Schuster, obviously, he was dictating a lot of what the defense was doing and doing a great job out there. Benny Snell coming in, and the run defense. I mean, what they did to Saquon was historic.
Yeah, no, that definitely was one of the most notable performances by this defense. Of course, a unit that really came together last year. So it'll be exciting to see what they can do against the run moving forward. Joe, I got to ask you on the flip side of that, what you didn't like in Week 1. Of course, losing to a team that missed a ton of field goals.
Yeah.
That's a tough one. But other than that, what did you not like about the Broncos' first performance?
Just some sloppy play in general. Again, the Jeudy drops were bad. They had a couple of really dumb turnovers. Though not turnovers, they had a dumb turnover with Melvin Gordon. They had a couple of really dumb penalties. The Josie Jewell penalty with the face mask was really frustrating. Yeah. Alexander Johnson, there's a lot of arguments still going on in Broncos country about how kind of ticky-tacky that was, but whether it was or not, it was a penalty. That was a dumb penalty. It really cost Denver a turnover. That kind of stuff, the clock management by Fangio at the end, that's been a debate for the last 3 days in Broncos country. That was really frustrating. That mostly. The fact that Denver had a golden opportunity there where no one misses 4 kicks in a game, and Denver had that in their hands, and they blew it, kind of. So, young team, but still, that was frustrating.
Yeah, no kidding. Now, Geoffrey, same to you. What did you not like with the Steelers Week 1 game?
I didn't like the injuries. We lost some offensive linemen. I don't like that. We're running a little shallow there. There wasn't a lot to dislike. I think the Steelers came in with a clear game plan. So there's some things you could say you don't like just simply because of how the Steelers schemed things. But we'll have to see. There was a very specific scheme going on in New York, and it's going to be a different game when Denver comes to Three River or to Heinz Field.
I think you're only out about 20-ish years on that.
Only a little off.
Speaking of injuries, though, Denver also hit huge so far, especially in the last 2 weeks with injuries. Really, almost a starting lineup of names. Right now, what's really the most concerning one to you? Obviously, Von Miller's a giant loss, but I guess more so outside of that, what's the most concerning injury that you're feeling right now, Joe?
The Broncos aren't going to have AJ Boye for this game, and that terrifies me because the Steelers' receiving core is low key going to be very, very good all year. And I think you touched on it, Geoffrey. Big Ben can be a game manager in part because he has the weapons now to basically just put the ball in their hands, and they're going to make plays. And without AJ Boye, Denver could be playing 2 rookies significant playing time in the secondary. that's very concerning. So.
Yeah, with that too, I know Bradley Chubb's coming off ACL.
Mm-hmm.
The rumor was he'd be on a snap count. Is that something we saw in week 1 and kind of can expect again in week 2?
I just was looking at this. He actually played in 73% of the snaps Denver had on the field. So he was probably on a pitch count, but he played a lot. From what I've seen, I've gone over the tape now twice. He looked pretty good. Hopefully looking better. I know he didn't have a lot, like basically anything in terms of stats, but the Titans were sliding protection his way. He definitely got chipped a few times. He was still getting there. He just wasn't actually bringing Tannehill down. Granted, it might be a different story with Ben. Ben's hard to bring down anyway. And Villanueva, like you guys have a really good left tackle. So
people were a little angry at Al on the Twitterverse today, so I guess that might be something to look at too. But without touching too much on that, because I think a lot of people said their piece already. Geoffrey, how did the Steelers exploit the Broncos injuries?
I think you have to attack the cornerbacks. You really have to work on them. But you'd think that would be deep, but you've got to watch out for their safeties, though. They've got 2 really good safeties in Denver. So I would expect a lot of what we saw against New York in the passing game, where if the Broncos are running man, you see those rub routes. If they're running zone, just attacking them with short, change of directions, overload their zones. Just very simple stuff to attack some quarterbacks who might not have all the nuances of NFL defenses going, because we got receivers that can do that.
And speaking of some receivers on the other side there, KJ Hamler, Cortland Sutton, game status is still up in the air for both those guys. Joe, what are you kind of hearing on those two?
Well, the hope is that KJ Hamler's good to go, and I think one of the reasons Denver kind of sat Cortland Sutton last week was the idea that kind of giving him a little bit more time would kind of help him down the rest of the 15 games. So we'll see. The receiving core is a completely different animal without Sutton in the lineup. So hopefully, even if he's like 80%, he plays, but we'll see. Yeah,
and then another pretty key injury, Philip Lindsay. I know the rumor right now is that it's doubtful, leaning more so into the side that he doesn't play. Have you heard anything on that front as well?
Everything I've heard is that he's probably not going to play. It sounds like it's going to probably be a couple weeks for him. So yeah, I don't think he's going to play.
So with that in mind, Geoffrey, instead of the Steelers taking on a dual-headed threat in Melvin Gordon and Philip Lindsay, what do the Steelers have to do to kind of just defend against the one in Melvin Gordon?
Melvin Gordon, I think you just play him straight up. I don't think he's the kind of running back you really have to demand a whole lot of attention to. Obviously, he can catch. He can do everything. So you do want to defend him, but he's not someone you really want to worry about to the point of what we did with Saquon Barkley. I don't think he's a guy that's a threat to just take over the entire game and beat you single-handedly. So I'm not that worried about him. I think keeping Devin Bush kind of focused on the running back, keep him focused on the running game and attacking the offensive line. That's what you got to do.
Now, you mentioned Devin Bush. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of ties to the Broncos with that trade. Obviously, Noah Fant and Drew Lock kind of being the pieces that end up going the other way to Denver. Joe, I kind of pose this to you first. Do you think you keep an eye on Devin Bush and see what he's doing compared to the guys that you got, just to kind of keep tabs on that kind of big time draft day trade from a year ago?
I had Devin Bush as my 3rd best player in the NFL draft for the Broncos needs last year, behind Ed Oliver, who I just loved Ed Oliver coming out, and then White. And I had White and Bush kind of flipping back and forth the entire draft process. So yeah, I keep an eye on Bush just because I love him anyway. But yeah, he's going to turn into a very, very good pro. And it's kind of crazy to think about the fact that Bush was a rookie last year and then Minka Fitzpatrick came in so late. So even as good as the Steelers defense was last year, like I expect them to be even better this year. I don't know if they're going to get as many turnovers, but I think the overall defensive performance is going to be better. So
yeah, I think the sentiment rings true to a lot of Steelers fans that they are kind of expecting another step from the defense. But on the other side of that trade, of course, some big names on the Broncos front right now. Geoffrey, is that something you think Steelers fans should be concerned about, that a guy like Drew Lock and Noah Fant are lining up in Denver now because Steelers moved those picks out to move up for Devin Bush?
I don't think so. Devin Bush was such a key add to our defense for a team looking to try and get another Super Bowl with Ben Roethlisberger. That was a great move for us. It fills a big need and an immediate need. Whereas Denver is looking, saying, "Hey, if they get a franchise quarterback out of it, then it's worth it." You know, as good as Devin Bush can be. If Drew Lock is their franchise quarterback, then it was worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this might be one of those one rare trades that both teams really are winners in this case. Backtracking a little bit to Von Miller. Of course, Joe, that injury is one of the more obviously serious ones. Like you don't really come across an edge rusher like Von Miller every year. One of those kind of franchise type guys. How do the Broncos kind of relieve him in that role for last week, and what do you kind of expect from them on their pass rushing front against the Steelers O-line?
Well, against the Titans, it ended up leading to a lot of Jeremiah Atachu playing. Malik Reed will probably see a little bit more snaps now, just because the Steelers do like to pass it out of traditional sets a little bit more than the Tannehill Titans do. The Titans like to basically just run it down your throat. Reed being a little bit lighter was a problem for that, so Atachu actually played more than him last week. But I would definitely see them. They're going to split the load, but I do think Reed will play more. Other than that, Vic Fangio has kind of sent Alexander Johnson and Josie Jewell on more blitzes. They've been trying to. They definitely, from what I could see, again, I don't have the all 22, but from what I've seen, they're definitely using more stunts. They're definitely kind of like they're trying to bring more pressure by design to make up for the fact that they just don't have on.
Right, and that's something the Steelers are going to have to deal with out a couple of their offensive linemen. Obviously, Zach Banner tearing his ACL. He's done for the year. They're starting right tackle. Inside, we still don't know DeCastro's game status, and his backup injured his pack, that being Stefan Wisniewski. So, Geoffrey, can the Steelers slow down this kind of injury-riddled defensive front?
I think they do all right. What's his name? Kevin Dotson, who came in at the end of the game. He didn't play a lot of snaps, but he was in there pass blocking on the Juju Smith-Schuster touchdown. He was in for the running game when they were running Benny Snell to run the clock out. They ran his way several times. I was really impressed with him in his rookie film. He missed some time in camp, which really hurt his development and how much the coaching staff trusts him. But if he gets thrust into action, I think we can handle it. I really do like Denver's front. It obviously lacks star power without Von Miller. That guy's a big player. But they're still scrappy. They get it done. They were giving the Titans some problems in the front four. Right
now, Drew Lock obviously entering year 2. I believe he was 6-1 or 6-2 as a starter in 2019. Not like the best game in the world week 1. What's kind of the vibe on him right now in Denver?
Cautious optimism is how I would probably describe it. A lot of people saw how he didn't kind of flub against the Titans and basically say he looks like he's going to grow into it. I firmly believe that the jury is definitely still out. Usually defenses don't really have enough tape on him to really start to throw wrenches at him yet. And I think that this could be the start of it because at this point, the Steelers are going to have 6 games from him. They saw him last year. Now they've seen how he developed over the offseason, at least in the first game. And I would expect them to start to throw some of the nickel blitzes they're throwing at Daniel Jones. I think they're going to play with Watt and Dupree dropping more because I definitely think that Locke could give them some gifts. I hope he doesn't, but I could definitely see it.
Yeah, now Daniel Jones was pretty cautious with the ball. Mm-hmm. What are you thinking in this game, Geoffrey, with Drew Lock coming in? Obviously not a ton of tape on him. What do the Steelers defense need to do to force those turnovers that Joe was talking about?
Well, Locke is willing to throw deep. We know that he was attempting. If you look at, I think it was Next Gen Stats had his attempted air yards average was pretty high. It was one of the higher ones. He's willing to throw deep. So you're going to have to keep your deep zone coverage on track. It's going to have to be on target. Which, if the Steelers keep putting Terrell Edmonds back there, that could be a problem. I think you really have to be careful with those receivers and the tight ends. The Denver Broncos love using multiple tight end packages, and like Joe said, if they go multiple tight ends and the Steelers counter with that 3-4, you're going to see T.J. Watt and and Bud Dupree dropping into coverage instead of pass rushing, which is a win. I mean, that's a win for the Broncos there. TJ Watt is obviously a dangerous still cover guy, but he's much, much more dangerous rushing the passer. So that is an area to watch, because if they can get tight ends matched up on TJ Watt and Bud Dupree and attack the seams, that's because the Steelers tend to go cover 3 a lot when they drop TJ Watt and Bud Dupree, and you can just attack those seams because they don't adjust. They're decent in coverage for outside linebackers, but that, I mean, what is that? What is it when you're a decent outside linebacker in coverage? You're still not that good. So that's one way they can attack us. Noah Fant, Jake Butt, and Nick Vannett could be trouble for us. And if they're doing that, then Drew Lock can have some success because he'll have throws to make. He'll have those mid-range throws to make. And once you start having to cover for that, it's other things open up.
Our old buddy Nick Vannett. Interesting you bring him up. Joe, I'm just curious, what kind of usages do you see Vannett kind of getting in Denver right now? And obviously he didn't love his time in Pittsburgh. Has he mentioned anything about enjoying himself in Denver?
I mean, so far he seems pretty happy with it. He definitely talked about back in camp about how the Broncos tight end room is the most talented one he's been in. So there's that. In the first game, he mostly played. He came on for some 2 tight end sets. I think that I went back and counted it. It looked like the Broncos used 12 personnel about 10 times out of their snaps on offense. He also rotated in a few different times where he was the only tight end where Noah Fant came off the field. None of his usage was like all that crazy. He ran most of the same kind of stuff you'd see it like he used at Pittsburgh. Easy routes in the midfield, like 5 to 10 yard range, and then mostly blocking. He's a complimentary option mostly. The big one is Noah Fant. I don't know why he disappeared in the second half yet. I really need to go back and look at the coverages once I'm able to. But Noah Fant in the first half was damn near unstoppable. And what's really crazy in the first half with it was a lot of yards after catch, and the Broncos would just give him the ball, and he was really explosive. And again, he's a crazy athlete, so it's not surprising. But if they start to kind of unleash him in that middle of the field too, like he could be an X factor for the game for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously tight end, that kind of slot spot is something the Steelers have struggled with in coverage a little bit. Geoffrey, obviously the Steelers, I would say, did a pretty good job against Evan Engram a week ago. Do you think they're able to continue that trend moving forward? Obviously, without Mark Barron this year, the coverage duties to those slot spots fell on someone else's shoulders. So, how do the Steelers defend that big time tight end and someone in the slot?
Well, Evan Engram, they did a lot of Terrell Edmunds on him. And he had 2 catches on 7 targets for 9 yards. And those 2 catches were when Terrell Edmunds was off of him. They just kind of avoided him when Terrell Edmunds was on Evan Engram in man. For the tight ends we're talking about in Denver, I think they got better blockers. So that's going to be harder to do. Noah Fant obviously is a big time athlete. You could see Terrell Edmunds on him trying to just kind of say, okay, we'll give up a little blocking here to shut him down in the passing game to try and do that. But I think the real problem is when they go with a 2 tight end set or something like that, they can create mismatches because you're pulling wide receivers out, you're putting defensive linemen in, or cornerbacks. You're pulling off a cornerback, putting in a defensive lineman. It creates better matchups.
Now, Joe, with your receiving core and tight end core, what skill position guy, one guy particularly, do you think Steelers fans should be most worried about going off against them this weekend?
Courtland Sutton. And I know like the Steelers have a very talented group of cornerbacks. Like they're much improved from even a couple years ago. But Courtland Sutton, if he's anything close to 100%, I've watched over his tape like 6 different times from last year. And there's definitely areas where he can improve. And year 3 tends to be where kind of things start to slow down and all the like little adjustments start to happen. So again, if he's anything close to healthy, I expect a really big game from him. And he's definitely Locke's favorite target. Locke is the kind of quarterback, at least at this point in his development, that if his number 1 receiver is even remotely open, he's going to give him a chance. And Courtland Sutton makes him right more than he's wrong.
Here we go. And speaking of Drew Lock, I'll just backtrack a little bit to you, Geoffrey. Obviously facing Daniel Jones week 1, Drew Lock week 2. Which one of those two kind of scare you more And in a sense, is this a tougher matchup for the Steelers?
Definitely. I think Drew Lock is going to be a tougher assignment because he's more willing to throw deep and also he has better receivers. I mean, Daniel Jones was good, but he's a solid young guy, but he doesn't have the targets that Drew Lock has now. If they're getting good matchups, if they're able to get open, they can beat these. They can beat our quarterbacks. They can give them trouble. And then he'll throw it. He'll take those chances. And we have some guys who are good in coverage that are hard at actually playing the ball. So if you're getting some deep, if Cortland Sutton, for example, is on gets over on Joe Hayden's side and they're playing Joe Hayden underneath and Terrell Edmonds over the top, he just airs it out to Sutton. I mean, you're tasking Terrell Edmonds against a guy who's really good with finding the ball and bringing it in, and that's not Terrell Edmonds' strength. So it all depends on the matchups. Like you get them over there, that's a throw to make. That's a throw to take.
Now, speaking of Cortland Sutton again, Geoffrey, obviously being that top target, if he's good to go, what's it going to take for the Steelers to slow him down?
I would prefer to see him on Steven Nelson. I think that's a much more favorable matchup for the Steelers because you have Nelson who also plays mostly on Minka's side. So like having that threat of, okay, you can kind of we'll put Steven Nelson, covering over the top and Minkah Fitzpatrick looking to jump routes. If you drop like a 10-yard in route, something like that, he's looking to jump it. That works against a Cortland Sutton, where I think a Jerry Jeudy is actually a better matchup for the Broncos to get on Steven Nelson. And if you can get Cortland Sutton on Hayden and Terrell Edmonds, that's troublesome. That's rough because he's fast. And he'll bring that ball in. Like he can bring in jump balls. So that's a place you could see some big plays happening. But I'm actually really, really concerned about Jerry Jeudy forcing the Steelers' hand and kind of opening things up for Sutton.
Right now, speaking of that Steelers defense, Joe, how are the Broncos going to attack this unit? And what's kind of the vibe you're getting from this game? Do you think that the Broncos are going to be able to score? Are they going to have to hold on to the ball for a long time? Or what do they got to do to stop this defense?
I think we're going to see a lot of ball control unless Sutton gets a favorable matchup. One of the things I thought Daniel Jones was doing a really good job. I was actually just watching the Giants game before I came on. They hit the Steelers a couple of times with like slant flat type patterns, or it looked like slant flat. It was definitely slant, but I couldn't always see what else was happening. Those are going to be there, and Pat Shurmur loves throwing those, and it's an easy completion. They're going to try and mix in some screens. I don't know how effective they're going to be. They had trouble with it last week, but Pat Shurmur's screen game tends to be pretty decent, so another week of that could lead to an explosive, like, again, a yak play for Noah Fant. That's kind of what they're trying to do. But I think it's going to be through the air. If they're going to win, it's going to be Drew Lock carrying him there because I don't think the Broncos are going to be able to move the ground very much on the ground.
Now, on the flip side of that coin, Geoffrey, that Steelers defense, a pretty loaded unit, but they're facing a ton of skill players on the opposite side of the field. What are the Steelers defense got to do to keep this a low scoring affair again?
I think you've got to keep Drew Lock contained and also pressured. He's very accurate on the run. He showed that he can make big plays if he's scrambling out of the pocket. So keep him contained and also get pressure there, which isn't going to be easy. It's a Mike Munchak team. That's his second year, and he has been stellar throughout his career. By the time once he's been in a team 2 years, you just can't get to their quarterback. So that's going to be a big deal because that's where his talent is on that front four. And if they can't get to Drew Lock and he has time, our secondary can be beaten. It's good, but it can be beaten. So that to me is the key there.
Awesome. And speaking of Coach Munchak, Joe, obviously we're quite familiar with what he was able to do and kind of transform the Steelers offensive line. Of course, it's only one game into this season, but what kind of differences have you seen from the Broncos O-line from 2019 to this season?
Well, since Munchak's been hired, the Broncos have actually churned out their entire offensive line other than Garrett Bowles. Elijah Wilkinson's now the tackle because Jawan James opted out, but the entire interior of the offensive line is different, and the running game looks completely different than it did like not a year ago, but 2 years ago. So like you can see the Munchak influence. They like to pull Dalton Reisner. You're going to definitely see a lot of that. They're going to try and get him out in the move. Now that they have Graham Glasgow, they started to do that last week to try and get Melvin Gordon and Philip Lindsay out in space. They're also going to run counter plays using that to kind of bait action away from it. But yeah, and then the pass protection. Garrett Bowles there's a chance that Garrett Bowles actually might be decent this year. He's been a first-round bust. I know I'm really hard on him. I tend to be. But it's just he was so bad for the first couple of years of his career. But even over the course of last year, he was getting caught with a lot of the same issues, but the Broncos were managing it much better. And a lot of that has to do with the coaching. And I think that they did that last week too. And the fact that Garrett Bowles held up to Harold Landry for the most part was really encouraging.
Now, Steelers' offensive line obviously is aging a little bit, Geoffrey, but do you think there's some sort of a drop-off from a technical base or anything along those lines from the loss of Coach Munchak no longer being in the Steelers room?
I think we are kind of seeing that. Like Joe was saying, they're able to cover for people who aren't playing quite as well, better under Munchak. And I think you see that with like Marquise Pouncey. When he gets a tough matchup, when he's struggling, it's just him struggling, and you see it. It's not, we're covering for that, we're shifting things, and all of a sudden it's okay. Marquise Pouncey is weak here, and we'll find a way to get through that. So I think a lot of their weaknesses are being exposed more without Munchak there. But we saw Ben stay mostly clean. New York has some good defensive linemen. They're still mostly clean. Those guys haven't forgotten everything yet. And Sweezum seems like or whatever his name is, Sean Sarrett. Man, I'm terrible with names.
You got it.
He seems to be pretty good. I think he's a good offensive line coach, but you're talking about replacing probably one of the best the NFL has.
Right. Now, I think now we'll flip over to part two for those of you listening on the podcast platform. If you're watching on YouTube, just hang tight. We got more conversation with Joe Rowles from the Mile High Report coming up. You are still listening to Behind the Steel Curtain Radio. I am Michael Beck, deputy editor of BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. Joined as always by Geoffrey, Benedict, and Joe Rowles is our special guest tonight from the Mile High Report. Continuing our conversation on the Broncos talk. Earlier in the episode, Joe, I asked you how the Broncos offense would try to find a way to exploit the Steelers defense. Flipping that side around, how can this Broncos defense slow down the Steelers offense?
I think they need to attack that right side. Now that the Steelers are without the tackle, they need to go after it. They did it last week with the Titans. They had some success. Jeudy Casey is mobile enough. One of the things that's really, I think it's underrated about him is his lateral mobility and his ability to stunt. And in Draymond Jones and I'm looking to see if they activate McTelvin Nagim. He's a rookie. He didn't play last week, but I do believe that he'll end up being better than the current fourth defensive tackle that the Broncos play right now, who is DeMarcus Walker. If they do, all three of them have the kind of mobility that the Broncos will probably stunt quite a bit to try and create confusion with the Steelers' offensive line. Because whenever you're throwing a new guy up there, he's dealing with switches. He's dealing with like who I'm blocking a lot more. And there's a lot more thinking going on. And Fangio is really good at trying to disrupt that. So I expect that. I expect Alexander Johnson to come on some blitzes. He's very, very good at it. Last year, the Broncos didn't do it a whole lot. But again, without Von Miller, I expect that to be a big part of their game plan going forward all year. So I expect that. Beyond that, I think there's going to be a couple traps and coverage, stuff like that. But again, Ben Roethlisberger is so good at reading that you have to play sound coverage to just make him go the length of the field, because otherwise he's just going to get you deep.
Yeah, he hasn't done it yet. Hit that long ball. Perhaps it comes this week with the Steelers being back at home. But Geoffrey, who do you think's having the big game for the Steelers, and what do the Steelers offense have to do to knock off that Broncos defense to get the end zone?
I'm looking at Juju again. The game he had week one was phenomenal. It's underrated. He had 6 targets. That's like 6 targets for 69 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's phenomenal play. And he was involved in a lot of the other routes they were running, drawing defense, shoving defenders out into other defenders. The James Washington, you go back and watch the James Washington touchdown. That's a rub route where Juju Smith-Schuster actually had one hand on his defender's back, on his corner's back, pushed him straight into James Bradbury. Bradbury was taken completely out of the play. At the end of the play, James Washington scoring the touchdown, and Bradbury walks up and shrugs. He's like, "What do you want me to do, guys?" I was like, "I was over there. I don't know." So he's a big factor, not just his own production, but in getting the whole offense going. And right now, that's the only receiver Ben really knows and trusts. We see Juju on the injury list, but he's probably going to play. I expect most of those guys, most of the wide receivers to play. I think there's a chance we could see, especially if the cornerbacks are in trouble, we could see Chase Claypool this game get a few more targets, because even though the Broncos have those good safeties, if you can pull Chase Claypool outside and put some attacks to the middle and make those safeties respect the middle of the field, you might be able to get Chase Claypool outside.
Right now, Joe, obviously the Steelers have kind of this core 4 receiving group with James Washington, Juju Smith-Schuster, Deontay Johnson, now the rookie Chase Claypool. Is there one of those guys that kind of jump off the paper to you that say this is the guy that we have to stop this game?
I'm afraid of Juju the most, just because Juju Smith-Schuster is really, really good on drag routes and underneath stuff, and that's typically what Fangio allows an opponent to get, with the idea that they're not going to be able to connect on him enough to keep a consistent offense going. But the thing is, the Steelers can. So I'm really eager to see if Fangio is going to actually change it up and make him try and beat him over the top, or if because of the cornerback situation, if they're going to just play their defense and hope that the red zone D holds up. So I'm concerned about Juju, because Juju is going to be able to make plays if that's what happens.
Right. Now, continuing that receiver talk, you did touch on Chase Claypool a minute ago there, Geoffrey. What did you think of his week 1 performance? Obviously, we've been known to be quite high on the pick. So what did you think of that week 1 out of him?
His catch on the sideline was phenomenal. It was against James Bradbury, who I thought was the perfect matchup for Chase Claypool, because he comes from the NFC South, where he was covering Julio Jones and, the other guys down there, Michael Thomas and
Mike Evans.
Also, yeah, Mac, thank you. He was covering those guys, and he did pretty well. He did pretty solidly against those. So we even said in the last week's show, Chase Claypool's not going to bring anything he hasn't seen before, and Chase Claypool still got him good once. I believe that was if you look at the distance of the throw, it was like 47 yards and was one of the longer throws from the quarterback to the receiver of week 1. So he's that player. Ben's willing to throw it to him, so it's going to be something to watch and see how much they, if they're willing to cheat safeties over there. If they're focusing and trying to take away the underneath stuff to Juju Smith-Schuster, and then you're also trying to pull a safety maybe over to help a young overmatched cornerback deal with a Chase Claypool, you're going to open space. Mm-hmm. It's just going to create space for guys like Eric Ebron, for guys like Deontay Johnson and James Washington. So we'll have to see. The big problem with Chase Claypool this week is Denver Broncos safeties. Both of them are really good. Either one of them can play over there and be like, okay, yeah, throw to the young kid. I'm here to make a play. Right,
and you know what? The Broncos, with their number 1 pick, they also went receiver. They did go out that offensive side and got Drew Lock a ton of targets. Jeudy, obviously, he was known for being a route god type player. He was compared to Jerry Rice earlier. Not my words, but that comparison was tossed around. Not quite, but I have to give it to you. But Jeudy, what are you seeing out of him? What do you like from his performance? And what do you expect from him the rest of the way?
I mean, I expected the route running to be really good, and it was. Again, I'm really eager to see if his hands look a little bit better. The 2 drops, both of them were just kind of concentration drops, and he has some of that on his Alabama tape. So it's not altogether surprising, but it's kind of, you hope that he kind of keeps it, kind of gets it together now. But I think he's going to find ways to get open. And his play after the catch, he has that dead leg. He finds ways to make space for himself. And the lateral mobility and the phone booth quickness is it's exceptional.
Right. A name, Geoffrey, we haven't really touched on too much yet on the Steelers offensive side, Eric Ebron. He drew a ton of double team matchups. He was tasked with blocking a lot. Do you kind of expect that trend to kind of continue, or is Eric Ebron bound to have a better game? Of course, he only had 2 targets last Monday night. One of them was sailed over his head, so it really was only one catchable ball his way. Do you think Eric Ebron has a bigger game this week?
I think it's possible. I mean, he only had that one catch, but that was a big third down catch.
Huge.
And I honestly thought Ben Roethlisberger was throwing it to someone behind him. Like, it was high, and he reached up and snagged it. So I can understand why Ben overthrew him on the other one, because he was like, all right, I'll just put it up there and see how high you can go. I think Eric Ebron could, but he's more of a to me, he's more of a complimentary target than someone that drives the offense. If you see Juju Smith-Schuster forcing the Broncos to cover those underneath routes, and if you see them having to take away Chase Claypool, moving some safeties back, it will create space. Ben will be looking for people to take advantage of that space. So we could see Eric Ebron have a decent game, but only if you're already seeing other people having success.
Right now, Joe, I pose this to you. Obviously, the Steelers' tight end group, and it really looks like they're only going to bring 2 with them each and every game at this point. Vance McDonald and Eric Ebron. Are those 2 names worrisome to you at all? Is that something the Broncos really need to take away?
I worry about it just because I worry about everything, but also the Broncos cut Todd Davis a couple weeks ago, and because of it, Josie Jewell's in. He looked, and again, from what I've been able to see so far, he looked pretty good, far better than I dared hope, because last year he mostly struggled. But my biggest question about him is his ability in coverage. The Titans didn't really have the kind of tight end. Like, Smith is okay. And that's not to be a disservice to him, but as a receiving weapon, he's not the kind of receiver that Eric Ebron can be. So the mismatch potential there is much higher. So I am actually really anxious about that matchup if the Steelers try and force it.
Right now, the Steelers running game, Geoffrey, James Conner in the first half really he struggled a bit. I don't know if his ankle was bothering him the whole game. With that kind of injury, we never really saw a time necessarily that he might have gotten rolled up on or something along those lines. But he goes down. Benny Snell comes in, puts up 118 yards. What are you kind of expecting out of the Steelers' backfield in this game?
Well, I think we're probably going to see. Do we even know if James Conner's going to play or not? Have they committed to that?
Nothing's
still kind of questionable.
Yet, yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. But I expect if he plays, they'll probably start with him. Probably start going. I think we're gonna see both. I think at this point you have to play both of those guys. You have to play Benny Snell. You have to play James Conner. And what you do from there, who gets the most snaps is going to kind of be determined on, is the defense we're facing better against a power scheme or better against a zone scheme? Because Benny Snell is more of a zone runner and James Conner is more of a power runner. And you'll see most of the time in 2019, one of them struggled and the other one was gaining yards. It was, one of them was running well and the other one wasn't. That was simply how it went. And so I think we could see a nice balance there. If James Conner is out for the game, I will be incredibly excited, because that means we're most likely going to see, rookie Anthony McFarland. I really want to see him on the field. I prefer to have James Conner healthy, but if he's not, I'll take watching Anthony McFarland try and do something, see what he can do. I don't expect Benny Snell to have the same success. As many yards as Derrick Henry got, he was under 4 yards a carry. Benny Snell's not going to be putting up 100 yards on 16 carries like he did against the Giants. That's not going to happen. So I'd like to see them get some of the running backs out into the passing lanes, which is something Benny Snell really doesn't give you a lot of. If James Conner is healthy and playing, I would expect to see a lot of passes out to the running backs, a lot of working James Conner out into the flats, trying to stress the defense on both sides there.
Right now, Joe, before I pose you the next question, I do invite the live chat. If you got any questions for Geoffrey, Joe, or myself, make sure to fire those in. We will get to them, a few of them, before the end of the show. Now, Joe, just circling back to that running back spot, obviously Derrick Henry is his own animal, but say James Conner does play. What does Denver really got to do to kind of stifle that two-headed attack of James Conner and Benny Snell?
Well, the Steelers like power running game does concern me more than the zone running game, just because Mike Purcell, he's the nose tackle for the Broncos. He's very underrated in how quick he is. And Fangio, a lot of times what he'll do is he'll line him up in a 2-eye. So he won't necessarily he'll be able to screw up outside zone because it makes for a really hard angle block for the guard. And what ends up happening is either Purcell's able to get there in pursuit from the backside, or it ends up leaving one of the linebackers free to run it down. So it doesn't just shuts it down. Whereas if the Steelers are able to run power or encounters, stuff like that, it creates more issues, especially Malik Reed really struggled with that against Buffalo last year. And granted, it's been a whole year since then, but yeah, that could be an issue. Draymond Jones at the point of attack is still kind of a question mark. I thought he had a couple really nice plays against the Titans, but again, the Steelers line could create issues for that too. So I'm hoping that if Connor's in, they do more passing stuff and less actual running at the Broncos right at the line of scrimmage. That said, I am I'm nervous about Josie Jewell in space. So it's kind of like no matter what, I'm going to be nervous, but definitely, I would rather Connor not play. That not to say I hope he's hurt, but I definitely am not going to mind if he's out.
You know what? We get it too. Like I think all Steelers Nation would be doing all right if Cortland Sutton wasn't playing. I think I don't know there'd be too many sad faces around these parts, but we do have a super chat from Kathy. She says really appreciates these guest guys. Thanks for coming on, Joe. So thank you for the $5 in the tip jar, Kathy. And again, Joe, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's really our pleasure. I do want to pose you another question right now with regards to Vic Fangio. Obviously, his time management at the end of the game there, a lot of people were upset with. What's kind of the vibe on him? Is he on the hot seat right now, or what's people thinking?
It depends who you ask. There is definitely a segment of Broncos country, kind of like the I would say like the drama llamas. They basically are already ready to tell Fangio to not call plays on defense anymore, just focus on time management. Most of us who are level-headed and or it's one game know that, I mean, mistakes happen. It was a bad, like, I'm not excusing it. It was definitely bad, but it happens. Every coach is like, at one point in his career, everyone was hating on Andy Reid for his decision-making and clock management. So I'm not ready to run him out of town. It's very early. I'll be more concerned about it if it continues, but I'm pretty optimistic with Fangio. I think he was kind of dealt a tough hand first year with Joe Flacco, who, in all honesty, was really washed when Denver acquired him. And then you basically had a rotating cast of quarterback last year. So I kind of look at this year as let's a grow as you go type of situation. So I'm optimistic that Fangio's the guy. Like he's made the defense work so far. So hopefully we can kind of build from there.
Geoffrey, Mike Tomlin had a little bit of a gaffe that I don't know it was talked about so much on online as much as the time management mishap in Denver. But Steelers didn't dress as many players as they were allowed to. They straight up just missed a guy and kind of abided by the rules from a season ago. The way Mike Tomlin talked about it in his press conference, and something co-editor of Behind the Steel Curtain, Dave Editor, really wanted to get the bottom up to, and he did. Give him the credit for that. But the Steelers, they just straight up basically forgot to dress a guy. What does that say to you? Is that something that's concerning, or are we looking too hard into this?
I think it's a similar type of thing. I mean, if you're looking for an excuse to say that a coach isn't good, time management gaffes, or something like, okay, we filled out a card wrong, or we didn't know how exactly to fill out this card, and so we messed it up. That's a thing. If it didn't really hurt the Steelers, so I don't think it's a big deal. I know it really, really annoyed our co-editor Dave Schofield here, who pays attention to those things a lot. But yeah, that didn't register too much with me. I missed seeing Ulysses Gilbert on special teams. I think we could have used him, been even better, but we still won.
Yeah, it's hard to complain when you come up with the W. Something that we talked about last week when we were doing Know Your Enemy for the Giants is plucking one player off of each team's roster. So Joe, I ask you, who's the one guy? If you could have one guy off the Steelers roster, who are you taking?
It's TJ Watt.
I think we'll hear that a lot.
Yeah. I mean, without question. I mean, if Roethlisberger was maybe 10 years younger, I'd probably take him. Honestly, if he was 5 years younger, I'd easily take him. I have enough questions about the elbow for the whole season that I'm a little nervous. And I'm still optimistic about Locke. But yeah, TJ Watt is unquestionably like so good. Watching him on tape, even it reminds me of Vaughn. It's not the same, but it reminds me of Vaughn, and I'm going to miss seeing that this year. So having someone like that would be really awesome.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what? He isn't someone that we've talked about too much tonight. Joe, I go right back to you on this. What is Denver going to do to slow down the Steelers pass rush? Their interior four of Hayward, Tuitt, Dupree, TJ Watt, all four guys have double-digit sack potential. So what are they going to do to slow down those four?
Mike Munchak. It's in Mike Munchak I trust type of thing. But I'm definitely very nervous about the edges more than anything. I think between Graham Glasgow and Dalton Reisner, Denver has some pretty talented guards. Dalton Reisner will have some trouble at times with really athletic guys coming inside. Jadeveon Clowney gave him an issue. The Steelers could do some of that, especially because you guys do blitz your inside linebackers. Again, Devin Bush and Williams, they both are pretty good coming forward. The other thing is that they'll occupy. So like what they'll do is they'll overload a side and then bring somebody late. I definitely saw that some against the Giants. They did that with a couple nickel blitzes. I'm worried about that kind of stuff. With Watt can stunt inside. He can rush on the edge. So again, I think Munchak has an answer. I don't know if I have an answer beyond maybe Mike Munchak's got some magic. So that's where I'm at. I'm praying that it works out.
You know what? There isn't really a guy in the league that probably knows that unit as well as an offensive line coach than Mike Munchak. So potentially he does have a few tricks up his sleeve. It will be interesting to see where that goes. But Geoffrey, going back to plucking one player off the roster, who are you taking off the Broncos team?
I'm taking Mike Munchak. That's who I'm taking. He is the X factor in this game. Like you said, nobody knows Keith Butler's schemes from an offensive line coach position better than Mike Munchak is going to know. They were together 3 years. And Keith Butler, those pass rush schemes haven't changed. Like you were saying, we even had TJ Watt lining up inside of Bud Dupree and straight up rushing the center. Mm-hmm. Like in the Giants game, like he just straight blitzed the center. I was like, holy crap. Like you don't even know where he's going. He's lining up over the tackle, over the wrong, the opposite tackle he normally lines up over. And then he's just running a little loops right in and hitting the center and throwing moves down. Like that's incredibly hard to deal with. But Munchak's seen all of that. So that's the X factor here is like, if we can't get to Drew Lock, then, what are we going to do? And speaking of Munchak, I got to bring this up because everyone should know I'm an enormous Mike Munchak fan. When he was here in Pittsburgh and all of a sudden no one could get to Ben Roethlisberger, I did a whole statistical review of his teams. And once he's in a spot, his second season, you don't sack their quarterback. When he was at Tennessee and he had Kerry Collins and Vince Young and those guys, if you take his span of time there, their sack rate was second lowest in the league, second to Peyton Manning. They got sacked less. Vince Young and Kerry Collins with Mike Munchak coaching that offensive line got sacked less than Tom Brady. Like that's incredible. At a lower percentage than Tom Brady got sacked. And then he comes to the Steelers and Ben Roethlisberger, who was just, like baiting people to sack him all his career. You couldn't touch him. And if you look at, I was looking before this started at the, what are they called? Next Gen Stats from NFL.com. Drew Lock had like the third highest time to throw. He holds the ball for almost 3 seconds every play. And yet they had like a 15% pressure rate. Like, what are you doing? You can't get to him. And it's the Titans. The Titans can put pressure on people. That's a Mike Vrabel defense. Mike Vrabel knows what he's doing. Like, I'm just an enormous Mike Munchak fan. And to me, he is the X factor in this game. He is the biggest threat the Denver Broncos pose to the Steelers. Is if he can neutralize our pass rush, then our defense is in a totally different ballgame. That's a totally different ballgame. We are the best at creating pressure. We are the number one sack defense in the NFL. And we're facing a guy who knows our schemes and who has everywhere he's been just been in pot. You don't sack his quarterbacks. So that's going to be a real showdown. I'm excited to see it. And I really hope the Steelers find a way to get the better of him.
Right now, this question I'm sure is posed to you, Geoffrey. Who do you fear more? And of course, this is from Logan DeLorenzo. Who do you fear more, Saquon with the Giants O-line or Munchak with Denver's O-line and Melvin Gordon?
Oh, I'm gonna have to go. Another Munchak stat is his running games are all over the place. There is no consistent stats to show that an offensive line is better running the ball with Mike Munchak. There's nothing to show that. But there is consistent, incredible evidence to show that he is fabulous at protecting quarterbacks. So still Saquon Barkley there. Although after seeing what the Steelers did to that offensive line, youch. Maybe Melvin Gordon should be a little more dangerous.
Joe, I swing this back to you. I'm curious to know your X factor for this game.
Drew Lock. It's got to be. If Drew Lock can stay upright, he's a different passer. When he's gotten pressured in the past, that's when he starts to really kind of his yards per attempt drops precipitously. He forces more bad throws. So it's that kind of thing. And again, that's the Munchak factor. Hopefully they can keep him safe, but that's also why I'm so worried about the Pittsburgh pass rush, because that combined with TJ Watt or Dupree dropping, I could see Locke throwing a stupid pass. But that said, he's brave enough and he has that kind of confidence where he's just going to continue to throw it, where I think so long as the game is close, you can't really count him out. So I think Drew Lock, this is going to be a really good show me type of game, because this is going to be a really tough matchup for Denver personnel-wise on defense. So the offense is going to have to come alive for them to have a real chance.
Yeah. Now, Geoffrey, before I pose to you the same X Factor question, Joe, I'm curious to know from you, considering the Broncos O-line, the Steelers pass rush, I believe each of the last 3 seasons led the NFL in sacks as a defense as a whole. If you had to make some sort of prediction towards what kind of sack total the Steelers defense might get in this one, what kind of number do you think would be a realistic one for the team getting to Drew Lock?
Probably 2 or 3. I think it's there's no way he's going to get out of it without like somebody getting home off the edges. And I could see a couple, because if Denver ends up in like comeback mode and just pure drop back passing, like he's going to be susceptible to it. But the one thing that gives me some degree of hope, and this is like kind of one thing where I do like Melvin Gordon over Barkley. Melvin Gordon, for all of and I've criticized his running stats and all of his other stuff quite a bit. He's a good pass protector, and that could help quite a bit in this situation because the nickel blitzes are going to be a big thing.
Absolutely. Geoffrey, so now I do go back to you with that X Factor question from a Steelers perspective.
X factor for the Steelers, I think is going to be the linebackers, because I think really a big weakness, a big question mark for the Steelers is how we deal with tight ends and guys who can block. And Denver can roll 3 in there. They give you different looks, they give you different things, and Noah Fant is a serious target to deal with. I kind of agree with the Drew Lock one too. He's a quarterback I kind of like. He reminds me a little bit of a younger Ben Roethlisberger. Not the brightest guy. He maybe has a little bit better decision making. You could add in there, but he's going to take chances. He's going to give the players on his team a chance to make plays. And that's what I've always said about Ben Roethlisberger. If you're on Ben Roethlisberger's team and you can make plays, he's going to give you a chance. He will throw you some tough catches and let you make them. The other X factor I gotta have too is Jerry Jeudy. I'm a huge fan of Jerry Jeudy, and I think he is not a good matchup for Steven Nelson. If they run him out there on Steven Nelson's side, I don't think that's a good matchup for Nelson. And I think we could see a lot of yards underneath going to Jerry Jeudy with good route running.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that those two line up against one another if that matchup plays out. Now, Geoffrey, I'll give you the floor if you have any questions to Joe.
Actually, I'm good. I think we could go to the live chat if you want. Like, there's a lot of people.
Is there any in particular that is coming to your eye, Geoffrey?
I think we had one here. Oh gosh, I lost it. You guys are talking too much.
At the very end of this, we will get into our game predictions. Let's see here.
Sorry, one thing, just I didn't bring it up before, but one thing I actually also am really concerned about with the Steelers too is running deep over outside of a 3-by-1 look. Last year when it was just Von Miller, no Bradley Chubb, down the end of the game, like the last quarter of the season, the Broncos basically gave up a big play on deep over routes in every single game, starting basically with the Vikings game. And the Steelers the Titans didn't really have the personnel to try and do it. They tried, but they don't really have the personnel to do it. The Steelers have the personnel to do it. The Steelers love coming out in 3-by-1 sets. And Roethlisberger's going to buy time in the pocket and find somebody if it's there. So, and I could see Juju getting the Broncos on one of those. So I'm very worried, and I'm very anxious to see if Fangio has an answer for it now that they're without Vaughn.
Awesome. Now we are taking out of time quickly here, so I think we'll get into our game predictions. If we have any good questions in the live chat, we'll quickly hit those at the end. Joe, I pose this to you. What's the final score in this one?
I know a lot of people in Broncos country listening are going to hate it, but I'm probably going Steelers 28, Broncos something like 24. And I hope they get 24. So I do think this is going to go to the Steelers. I think the Broncos are probably going to start 0-2 this year.
Which is a pretty tough spot to put yourselves in, especially at the very beginning of the season. Geoffrey, I take this one over to you.
I have it a little bit lower scoring than that. I think I'm going like low 20s, like 21, 22 for the Steelers, and probably like 16 for the Broncos. I think this one could be close.
Yeah, and I'm definitely also leaning that way. I like the fact that this game is in Pittsburgh. Historically, the Steelers have struggled a ton in Denver, so I like that it's at home. I'm not loving the minus 7.5 points for my degenerate gambling friends out there. So I think my pick in this one, it'll be a one-score game, but something probably along the lines of Steelers 24, Broncos 17. Not quite covering the whole spread there, but I think it will be a closer one than that. Logan De Lorenzo in live chat agrees with me, so I appreciate that. But Geoffrey, do you have any closing thoughts for us before I turn it over to Joe?
Not really.
Beautiful. Love it. Joe, do you have anything going on that you want to plug? And again, thank you so much for coming on with us.
Yeah, definitely. No, again, I really appreciate coming on. As far as plugs, if you like Broncos stuff, I'm going to have a bunch of stuff over the weekend. I'll probably write about the Steelers, obviously. So you'll get to see a little bit of my thoughts on how the Broncos could potentially come out of this game with a win. But yeah, other than that, go Broncos.
Yeah.
Hopefully they surprise.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Any given Sunday, it's one of the beautiful things in football. Nothing is guaranteed. Of course, check him out on Mile High Report. Geoffrey, Benedict, again, thank you for joining me. As always, I'm Michael Beck. And again, Joe, thank you so much for joining us. As we sign out here, as always, we like to go out on tune in, tell a friend, and subscribe. Have a great night, guys.